When I was leaving the gun range recently, I picked up a couple of shells off the ground before leaving and figured I'd use the buffing wheel to polish them up, and then I can make them part of this project. So put a paper towel on the end of a pencil, and then that way it held these shell casings from turning around on the wheel while we were going. And you can see the one on the right is the one that has not been buffed, so completely different look to them, which is great. After I did that, just put some super glue on, make sure that none of the pieces floated away or shifted once they were put inside the resin. And once they're glued down, just went to the bandsaw, made a crude circle. It doesn't have to be nice here because I'm going to turn it later on the lathe, but wanted to make the piece somewhat close to the final dimensions. That way you don't waste a lot of the resin. So it's a deep pour epoxy resin here, which is 3-to-1 mixture. Spin it for a couple of minutes, then put it in, and the problem, I did not let the hot glue seal. So anyway, it leaked through. That's why I had to put it in the measuring cup. And when I took it out, you can see a lot of the excess came out. So anyway, had to get another batch mixed up and then put it in there, and intentionally left the video here that shows all the bubbles, and then you can see inside. And then you put it on the pressure pot, seal it down really, really well, and once it's sealed, just put it up. I left it around 50 psi, had it sit overnight, and then you can see all the bubbles get popped / pushed out of here, which broke it loose. Once I got it broken loose, glued it together on a waste block, and then used the activator so that way it would adhere very quickly. Put it on the lathe, and I tried to minimize the amount of lathe footage here for all of you guys watching, but this one big piece that was unintentional ended up being a little bit finicky and did hit me in the face, which thankfully I had the face shield, but it hit me in the face a couple of times. So once I got it loosened up pretty well, then I was able to get the hacksaw out, cut through it a good bit, pry it into it. And again, it's never a good idea to use your carbide tip tools to pry something. So do as I say, not as I do on that one. That was a bad form. Then flipped it around. I did crank it down a little too hard on the end here with the tailstock. So another lesson learned for the next time. Don't do that because it takes a long time to get that little indentation out. But more lathe footage. You can see all the spaghetti getting thrown, and this stuff actually formed up quite nicely. It had a lot more moisture to it than I expected. And this is what it looks like after I got the overall shape turned. So you see really cloudy, and then you just go with some coarse sandpaper to go through the first couple of rounds, get it shaped the way you want. Then you can use finer grit sandpaper, or I ended up using my abrasive pads. So it's not the final stage. I did this, and then after I realized that the scratches were a lot more prevalent than I thought. So you can see them coming up here in just a second. It's way too much. So I ended up going back to the drawing board and using more sandpaper and then sanding all those against the direction they were showing, and went up to about 1200 grit sandpaper and then polished it up. So you can see it polishes up pretty nicely without even having the buffing done just yet. So once I got it to this stage, I got rid of all the grime and slurry that had shown up inside the wood from all the sanding. Then taped off the resin pieces. I didn't want to scratch them as I was finishing up the wooden base here. So the wooden base, I went to 320 grit sandpaper and then used high friction polish, which works out really well but gets hot, which is what you want it to do. So you can see it has a really nice sheen to it, and hopefully that glow, you can kind of see the way it changes colors within the light. So I really like this kind of friction polish. And then once I had that ready, I put tape on the wood and then used a Dremel with, thankfully the battery was dead, so it was a slow speed and more car polish, and then wiped it clean, and here's the final product. So it's really cool, just a little week-long project. I gave it plenty of time to harden up, and I like the outcome. It kind of distorts the angle, but when you look straight down, it works as a magnifying glass, and you can read the words Luger and 9mm really well. But I think it's pretty neat, and just something to pass the time, little test product, and hopefully I can do some more resin projects soon now that I've learned